and welcome to the podcast of the Prison Officers Association, Britain's largest professional trade union for staff working in prisons and correctional centres, public and private mental health service trust providers and immigration services with nearly 35,000 members. The issue of separation centres has been thrown into sharp relief by the horrific attack on 3 prison officers at HMP Frankland in 2025. This led to an independent review of separation centres, the so-called Hall Report, which was published later in the same year. The union has generally been supportive of the 13 recommendations in the report, and I caught up with NEC member Phil Hannant and NEC Vice Chair Todd to review the progress that has been made so far and the work that is left to be done. Hello listeners, with me today are Todd, NEC Vice Chair, and NEC member Phil Hannant, and we're talking about separation centres.
I think there can't have been anyone in the union or in the union movement as a whole or in society as a whole that wasn't absolutely shocked by what happened at HMP Frankland in 2025. And that threw the whole question of separation centres into the public domain in a way that perhaps it wasn't before. But Phil, could you perhaps give us a potted history of the separation centres issue?
Yeah, well, the separation centres were introduced in 2017. The first one was opened at HMP Frankland, which was to house a maximum of 8 prisoners that would have been separated from the population, but obviously still maintaining a full regime. They then were to progress to a further 2 separation centres, which was HMP Full Sutton that came online shortly afterwards, followed by HM Wood Hill. The initial discussions prior to the separation centres opening, which Richard Vince was involved in then, and there was an indication that as the years progressed, they would be looking at up to 15 to 20 separation centres across the prison estate. As we know, there was only ever 3 opened, and that quickly became, over the years, that the HMP Wood Hill shut. Ultimately, then it dropped down to only HMP Frankland being the only separation centre in the country. But that comes with its own risks, potentially, as you know, the separations are about extremists, and we are talking Muslim extremists, right-wing extremists, animal rights extremists. Any identified extremists within the service would be potentially up to going on to these centres.
So the situation had a much broader reach when it was envisaged in 2016, 2017, and then it gradually whittled away until it was really all centred on HMP Frankland in 2025. Now, after the attack on 3 prison officers in the separation centre in 2025, the government commissioned an independent report, which was published later that year and contained a number of recommendations. Was the union very much involved in drawing up those recommendations? Was the union happy to see those recommendations? Will those recommendations, if enacted, make things better or make things right, do you think?
So the officers of the union met with Jonathan Hall, KC, when he was doing reports and listened intently to what we had to say. You know, we had real issues around litigation starting to run and staff being pulled left and right instead of being supported to get on with the job. And if you look at the 13 recommendations, gladly the government have accepted them all. I think with the caveat, recommendation 3 is the only point that I think HMPPS and the government have kicked back on, which is a single separation centre with a tiered approach. They want to keep 3 separation centres, and then possibly in the future look at submitting a spending review bid to be able to build a specific high control centre, possibly in the footprint of a high security prison currently. Now that's possibly some years ahead. I hope what this report does gives confidence to the staff that are working in there that they're supported and makes the management line more clearer there's a recommendation that the on-site governor shouldn't be managing it. It should be managed centrally. And I think possibly that will cut down on misinformation. So staff will be clearer on what their remit is within there. I think one of the recommendations gives more power to prison officers on the ground managing the regime, which is a real positive, because the latent risk sometimes isn't appreciated by management who aren't on site all the time on the unit. So hopefully that will help staff.
And if the training is of the same calibre as that was introduced in 2017, when NEC member Jackie Marshall sat in on some of the training courses, and she and members who took part in them described them as unlike any other sort of training they'd ever had. If there's a return of that sort of training to support officers, presumably that's something that's on the union's wish list as well.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I did the whole of that training. I was on the branch committee at HMP Frankland at that time, and I was part of the first set of staff setting up that separation centre and actively working on that. So I went through the whole of that training, and I will say it was probably the best training I have received by HMPBS throughout the whole of my long career. It was very, very good. It was very informative, and it gave us a fantastic starting block to how we would set these centres up and how we would effectively work.
Often, although there's a good talked about reform and about change, money doesn't come along to make that change possible. And sometimes governments of all colours kick issues into the long grass because they feel they're too difficult to deal with. Do you get the feeling that so far your engagement with government has been positive and you are making reasonable progress towards securing the change that's necessary?
I'll pick up on that one. So recommendation here is the government has to sort of set aside part of the European Convention on Human Rights, in particular Article 8. We've had positive engagement, but we haven't had engagement particularly around that and where parliamentary time is going to be made to sort of achieve the aim of that recommendation. And then also there was a case around regime provision and isolation. That needs to be reversed as well. So although control may be coming back to what it should be, I think post the horrific incident, the speed at which people wanted to get back to some prescribed normality was too fast and didn't understand the risk that they were dealing with. And we had to push and push and push as a trade union that self-cooked kitchens weren't going to be reopened, and prisoners in those centres weren't going to get access to cooking equipment. Now, the trade union shouldn't have to do that. The employer should do that as following the incident. The employer should be protecting staff. It's no good having 3 staff nearly murdered, which the trade unions are well behind these staff, but then decide to put body armour in. Body armour clearly should have been there from the start. We'd been campaigning for stab-proof vests for a long, long time, and it took a horrific assault like this to achieve that aim. Now, that's not good enough from our employer and government.
In some ways, despite the gravity of the issue and the complexities of the issue, this is no different from any other health and safety risk management regime, is it? And therefore, putting more authority and more control in the hands of the frontline officers and an easier reporting line should hopefully address some of the concerns around that.
Yes, you would hope so. I've never worked in a separation centre, Phil has. I've worked in plenty of in segregation units. And if the band 3s on the ground don't feel in control of that regime, then it falls. Confidence wanes and prisoners start to dictate. And that can never be the instance, particularly in a high-risk environment like a separation centre.
To put a little bit more onto that, obviously, what I will say is you have to have a management of these centres that are totally aware of everything to do with separation centres, the referral process, the issues of potentially putting staff who were untrained in there. There's many, many issues. And when the centre first opened in 2017, certainly at Franklin, the governor and the CM that ran the centre and obviously engaged in us as Band 3 officers and Band 4 supervisor officers was second to none. We were there. We were one team. There was no real, there was a rank structure, obviously, but we all felt part of the team. We were all given a voice and we were all listened to. And when you start to just move managers about and put a manager in there, sometimes things like the separation centre can become a tick box for your success profiles as managers as a step up because it's in the spotlight. So you have to have a buy-in from the managers and you have to have the staff that have full confidence that their voice is going to be heard.
I'm listening between the lines of what you were saying, Phil, and I think that's a horrific, enormously worrying state of affairs, because if managers become complacent in some way, which is what it sounds like you're describing, then they can not be aware of the danger signs that are being fed to them by the staff or that they're seeing with their own eyes.
Yeah, some managers obviously deal with it differently. You're put under pressure because you have to remember that the individuals that end up in separation centres have the backing of their legal teams, and they are constantly challenging through processes, through request complaints. They are constantly, and if you have a manager who starts to be bombarded by that and then starts to be more concerned about how they are going to answer it for litigation rather than continually pushing because they understand fully and backing the staff on various things. Things like, prisoners may say, well, why can't I have something in my cell now and hand it back out? Well, there's a simple answer to that, because if you have something in your cell, nobody can monitor what you've got in your cell and what you may be making of that. So, when pressures come from legal teams, if the managers aren't strong enough to actually defend that, and defend the staff on that, then it is worrying times.
Yeah, the legal side of this is perhaps a bit confusing for some, because although there is a reference and the union is supporting a reinterpretation of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, personally, I'm surprised that this is even a debate, because it's not saying we're going to do away with Article 8. It's just saying that Article 8 talks about what's proportionate in all the circumstances, and you can't get anything that's a clearer illustration of what is proportionate than the terrible attack that took place in 2025.
But you can't, and we've been here before with then SSUs in the 90s when 6 prisoners escaped from Whitemore. We don't want to be facing that type of scenario again, and we don't want to see staff, again, as I said before, fearful of litigation and not being able to carry out the job that they're employed to do. They've got to keep each other safe before they can keep the community safe and the public safe. Prison officer safety is the most paramount things when it comes to protecting the public.
Well, although we're talking mostly about what happens within the separation centres, the way in which people who need to be in separation centres are identified and nominated, if you like, if you can use that terminology, in the rest of the estate is just as important, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And we're facing a new threat. Well, not a new threat. We're facing threats from serious organised crime. In the future, will we be putting people like that in separation centres where we have high control of them so they can't get access to drones and to the internet and illicit phones? We've got to be able to do the job that we're employed to do. Otherwise, the system fails.
I suppose one of the things that must be a bit unsettling for the pair of you is probably between you. You've got more experience and more knowledge, more practical understanding of these issues than the rest of the people you're sat around the table with all put together. Do you find that you are being listened to and that your experience is being acknowledged as a key ingredient?
I think we are being listened to. We have meetings with the employer around it. It's whether what we're suggesting and recommending actually gets put in place in policy. There's too much fear around the law these days. We keep saying it. PPS don't listen, then it'll be to their detriment, and unfortunately to the detriment of our members.
Is there a preferred outcome that the POA has in all this? Is it ultimately for the creation of what some people call a supermax establishment, such as some parts of the United States have?
I think ultimately, I think we're tending to label them as high control units rather than supermax. And yes, I think we definitely need them because, unfortunately, if you look at the national security threat at the minute, it's the highest it's ever been. And that is reflected within the walls. Unfortunately, sometimes people negate to remember that and act on it. You can't just keep carrying on the way that you're going and hope that everything is safe. The most successful day in a prison separation centre is when nothing happens.
I mean, obviously Dave just touched on that, the red tape and the fear of the legal. Just a little bit more context. Again, when we took the first couple of prisoners onto the separation centre, the feedback from where we took them, from one of the wings we took one of the individuals from, was a massive change in atmosphere and other prisoners coming to talk to staff where so that actually indicated on that it seems that worked, and it did take somebody who was very, very powerful within their organisation. But equally, we can't forget the horrific attack in 2025 wasn't the first attack on the separation centre. Some 2.5 to 3 years ago, a member of staff's career was ended through an attack on Frankland Separation Centre. And that is giving him life-changing injuries and also life-changing for his family to what he had to deal with. His career was ended very prematurely through another attack on a separation centre.
I think the message that comes across loud and clear is that hoping for the best is not a viable strategy when it comes to dealing with these sorts of issues. What support can the rest of the union give both to the branch committee at Frankland, who are right in the front line of this, and to the union's policy as a whole of getting effective and positive change in this regime?
I think we demonstrated that post-incident. We arrange meetings to support the local committee with the director of security, who's very influential in the way separation centres are run. The local committee, through its members, came up with a list of what they wanted going forward. That list was put to the employer. The line management outside of the prison were very supportive. So I think that demonstrates that we are a unique union where our branches are the most important things to us. And even the employer.
And Phil, from your point of view, having seen it from an NEC perspective and a branch perspective.
Yeah, I think as already been discussed, the branch, and I've spoken to the whole of the NEC, spoken to them at the local branch level. We are fully behind the branch, and the branch was a very proactive branch. Right. What they did on the day was fantastic to where they managed it, and they'll always have the full backing of the NEC.
My thanks to Dave and Phil. And if you want to find out the very latest on this campaign and all the work undertaken by the POA on behalf of its members, visit poauk.org.uk, where there is also information on how to join the union should you not already be a member. Thank you for listening. We hope you have liked what you have heard and will join us for the next episode of the POA podcast. Thank you and goodbye.